sports are very repetitive. So what can you do to find something different that maybe all the other photographers might not be shooting? Find a moment, a composition, some patch of nice light that differentiates your work from everyone else's. How can I do this differently? How can I make a photo I'm proud of that doesn't look exactly like it did last year?
Hello and welcome to the Photo Forward podcast, the weekly show where we explore the stories behind some of the greatest photographers and visual storytellers the world over. From their photographic origin stories to finding work-life balance as creative professionals, to how to actually make a living as a photographer, cinematographer, or multimedia creator. We uncover what makes them tick and their shutters click. I'm your host, Ben Brewer. But before we get into today's episode, I want to give a big thanks to everyone who's listening, subscribing, and dropping a rating or review on the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. It means so much to me to really start creating a community around the show. So if you want to hear more inspiring and creative shows like we've been producing, please head over to your podcast app of choice and give Photo Forward a review or a rating to help make this show reach an even larger audience around the world. All right, let's get into the show. Do you as a photographer ever feel like you're just not connecting with the right clients? Or that you just keep getting assignments and work that doesn't light you up or bring you any creative joy to work on? Well, you are so very far from the only one. But it is avoidable by honing your creative style and making work that draws people in. Put simply, post eye-catching photos, get eye-catching assignments, put up a generic portfolio, get generic work. Pulling from the world of marketing, there's a great principle that all photographers can take a cue from, and it boils down to this. It's effective to be better, it's intriguing to be different, but the best creators of all meld these two facets into their work and are both better and different. That's what catches the eyes of the public, editors, and art directors, and gets you hired. Adam Glanzman is an independent freelance photographer based in Boston and available photography and motion work worldwide. He was a staff photographer at Northeastern University in Boston, where he worked for 4 years before leaving to expand his own photography business. Adam's work has been recognized by Pictures of the Year International, POYI, the National Press Photographers Association, NPPA, the University Photographers Association of America, and College Photographer of the Year. He was also selected to attend Eddie Adams 29. In today's episode with Adam Glanzman, he and I go through the development process for his eye-catching style, break down how he made the transition from staff to full-time freelance, and walk through one of his memorable personal projects and how that translated to future paid work assignments. As always, show notes and links to other episodes of the Photo Forward podcast can be found online at photoforward.media/podcast. All right, time for me to get out of the way and let you guys into today's conversation with freelance photographer Adam Glanzman. Adam Glanzman, welcome to the Photo Forward podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Ben.
Absolutely. Well, before we get started, just to date the interview a little bit, we are, in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. So just wanted to sort of check in and see how you're doing and making sure you're staying safe and all of that.
Yeah, can't complain. Happy, healthy, and all my immediate friends and family are also healthy. So all is good on that front. And business-wise, things have definitely changed, but hoping to adapt and have a quick rebound. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And you're based in Boston right now, correct?
Yep, I'm in Boston.
All right, great. Well, yeah, I saw some of your recent work just recently for Bloomberg in Boston. So I guess while we're on the topic, talk to me a little bit about what you're doing while you're out staying safe. What goes into shooting during such a crazy time?
Yeah, totally. So, like most photojournalists, I think right now it's definitely a different time covering something, a disaster you can't really see. Like everyone else, I've got my mask and gloves and Lysol wipes in my car and, just trying to be extra cautious about what I touch, and make sure not to carry those germs with me, or potentially carry my germs into the field. So yeah, trying to adjust to the strange and different COVID landscape has kind of been an adjustment, and a little difficult for sure. You can't see people's faces, and you can't break down those barriers with a smile and small talk. Things that normal things you would do as a photojournalist before all this happened.
So are you getting tired of using your 70 to 200?
Yeah, I mean, it's you know I'll still bring out a wider lens and the 70 to 2, but it's it's definitely a challenge to make intimate photos when you're photographing from a distance.
Well, from the stuff that I've seen, you're doing a great job of it. So,
Well, thank you.
all right. So we're going to go in a ton of different directions here, touching on your work as a freelancer. But before that, you actually worked at university at Northeastern. So tell me a bit about, and you were there for 4 years. So tell me a bit about how you got started there, and how necessarily being constrained by a university maybe helps your creativity a bit.
Totally. Yeah, so I was very fortunate to work at Northeastern for 4 years with Matthew Meduna, who was a great mentor and also a great photographer. He is the photography manager there. I learned a lot from him, working very closely together over that time. So yeah, I mean, they operate as sort of a mini newsroom. It's kind of like a PR wing for the school, where we're telling stories about students, faculty, staff, alumni, anyone related to Northeastern who is doing something interesting. We would cover it and, act like a newsroom in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we had a lot of creative freedom to tell these stories in interesting ways, and a lot of the time that meant portraiture. So we had a lot of creative freedom to work on our lighting skills, and take a subject that might otherwise not be all that exciting, and throw some colored lights on them, or shoot through a window, or just try to find a different way to photograph that person that might be a little more interesting than your standard, or I should say typical university look. You might think of someone in a suit, arms crossed in front of a big glass building. We tried to get away from that look as much as we could.
Well, that's awesome. And we'll definitely dive in more into creating the look, creating that unique visual style. What are kind of the limitations of shooting on a campus? How do you think that sort of shaped, shooting in the same place, the same however many square miles for 4 years? How do you think that shapes you as a photographer?
Totally. Yeah, so a lot of what we did at Northeastern was feature photography. So basically go out on campus, try to find something different, try to find a nice, moment or a nice patch of light, something like that. So obviously after the first year, you've done all the big events, and year two, you're shooting the same events, and you're approaching it. How can I do this differently? How can I make a photo I'm proud of that doesn't look exactly like it did last year? So yeah, it's definitely a challenge, but I think it's similar for any type of photography where, if you're doing events or even sports, I mean, it's definitely repetitive. So the challenge, I think, for a lot of photographers is, how do you find a new way to photograph this? How do you stand out and make something different and something that, you're proud of?
Mm-hmm. Well, are there some examples you can think of where you had shot it one way one year, and then you had to rethink it, you had to break the mold and do the same event or the same subject matter different the next year?
Yeah, that's a good question. So graduation, commencement is always the big pinnacle event of the year. So, we've always been fortunate enough to work on a team. We've hired freelancers in the past to work with Matt and I, and it's always fun to get new people in there to work alongside and get those creative juices flowing.
Hmm.
So I think commencement, we've in at least the years that I've done it, we would kind of break up and certain people would have different responsibilities, and I think working on a team is
Hmm.
always a nice way to kind of get a fresh look at something and see someone else's take and see what they saw, and then you apply that look elsewhere, or you apply those skills, and
Hmm.
just having conversation with other photographers in that sense has always been helpful for me.
Yeah, that's interesting. In certain ways, like being the university photographer is kind of like being the photographer in a small town newspaper. I mean, you're the person.
Totally. Yeah, no, exactly. I think that's a great way to look at it. I mean, and Northeastern's a big school.
Mm.
It's in terms of small town newspaper stuff, there's a lot of similarities there with repetitive events.
Hmm.
And I've worked for some smaller newspapers as well, and you've got your Fourth of July festival, and they have high school graduations. It's a very similar idea.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, and so, are you from the Boston area originally?
No, so I grew up in Westchester, New York,
Hmm.
about 45 minutes north of the city.
Okay. So, what brought you to going to working at Northeastern?
Yeah, so I moved to Boston in 2015 to intern at the Red Sox as
Hmm.
a photography intern. And that was a seasonal internship. And towards the end of the summer, I applied for the job at Northeastern and was, very fortunate to get that job, and ended up staying in Boston because of it.
Okay. Okay. Gotcha. So with the Red Sox, tell me a bit about some memorable times from that. What do you think you learned from being an intern at that high level, shooting at the Major League Baseball?
Yeah, so interning at the Red Sox was a great experience. Again, I was working alongside, phenomenal photographers that, I was working with Michael Ivins and Billy Weiss, who's still doing photography there. And, learning from those guys was super helpful. And, along with all the journalists who cover the games,
Hmm.
it was, it was really cool to talk to some of these people and learn from them when I was starting to do professional sports. But yeah, I mean, that internship, there was a lot of freedom to kind of roam the park. And at least when I was the intern there, they would have us cover features again, so
Mm.
you're basically walking around Fenway, not with a massive 400 lens in your hand, but with a 35 millimeter, and kind of find some quiet moments of fans, or
Hmm.
again, look for nice light, things like that.
Yeah. What do you think you learned most from some of those some more established guys, the more veteran folks that you're working under?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to what we were talking earlier. It's just sports are very repetitive. So what can you do to find something different that maybe all the other photographers might not be shooting? So find find a moment that find a moment, a composition, some patch of nice light that differentiates your work from everyone else's. So that was definitely something I learned. And obviously sports, look for the moment. You have to always be prepared. And if you're shooting peak action, you have to concentrate, and you can't let your mind wander too much, or you'll obviously miss the home run or the grand slam, whatever it is. But yeah, just always be prepared when it comes to sports photography, and then see where everyone's standing, and maybe go stand somewhere else, try a new position, and again, look to make something different.
Yeah. That's really the only way. I mean, by doing the same thing as everybody else, you're going to get the same results. So I can definitely
Exactly.
appreciate that. So, on the topic of doing something a little bit different, while researching the episode, I noticed that you actually majored in environmental science. So, tell me a little bit
Yeah.
about that for a photographer, as someone myself who has a degree totally unlike photography, and as in biochemistry. Tell me a bit about why environmental science, and a little bit about what took you from, say, that path to the photography path.
From an early age, I always loved being outside, and working with animals and things like that. So I thought environmental science would be an appropriate path for me. At least in high school, I didn't take photography as seriously, so it didn't seem like an obvious career path at the time. So yeah, I got to college. I majored in environmental science, and I always dreamed of working for National Geographic and doing that sort of thing. So it seemed like, well, I'm not going to be a National Geographic photographer. Maybe I can be a scientist or something. So that was kind of the mindset at the time. And then I worked at the Michigan Daily student newspaper, which was really my education in journalism and photography. And being a photographer professionally kind of seemed like maybe a real possibility after a few years working at that student newspaper. And then that's when I really was like, maybe I'll give it a shot, and maybe I'll really try to do this instead. This is what I enjoy. This is really what I'd love to do.
Was there a moment when it did become clear that this was a possibility, or it's just kind of a gradual process?
Yeah, I mean, I would say if I had to pinpoint a moment, I was accepted to intern at Time Magazine after my senior year of college. Mm-hmm. So I went back to New York for a year and interned there. And I guess when I got accepted to that internship, I was like, oh, maybe I can do this. Before, up until that point, I was applying all sorts of, non-photography related jobs, mm-hmm. In addition to a handful of photography related roles. So that's when it was like, oh, wow, maybe I'll give this a real shot.
So what did you see as your kind of career goals at that time when you did make that decision to say, you know what, I think I can do this photography thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the time I wanted to work for like newspapers. I wanted to be like a staff photographer at, a newspaper somewhere. It was kind of my, career aspiration. And it sort of, hasn't changed drastically over time, but, changed a little bit. So, then I kind of had my eyes open to other possibilities, like working at a university, working for a sports team, freelancing for commercial clients. So doing, other types of things in addition to photojournalism, which I've always enjoyed, is, what's great about photography, I think, is there's lots of options.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So exactly that. I'd love to get into talking about your making the transition to freelancing. So you'd worked at Northeastern for 4 years. When did that sort of itch to go freelance really kind of take hold? And we'll get into more of the sort of nuts and bolts of making that transition.
So yeah, all throughout my 4 years at Northeastern, I was still freelancing at night and, taking my vacation days to do freelance work and, working weekends for freelance clients. So I was constantly, doing freelance work in addition to my full-time job for 4 years, basically. And it kind of got to a point where just, looking at the numbers, it made sense to make the jump. And, it was something I really wanted to do when I was having to turn down freelance work because I had used up all my vacation time, or because, I had conflicts at work I couldn't miss. And, it got to a point where I wanted to make the jump. And, it wasn't like an easy decision by any means, because I loved working at Northeastern and had a lot of good friends there and still have good friends there. So it was definitely hard to leave behind like a steady, well-paying job that I really enjoyed. But I felt, for my career, it might have been the right choice.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And how long, I mean, you're looking at the numbers. What should people know about, or people who are considering that, what do they need to know about looking at the numbers and making that transition?
That is a good question. And I don't know that I am in the right position to give an educated answer on it. Right. But, for me, it was, how much money can I make freelancing and how much am I making now at my full-time job? And I think if one is greater than the other, then, you take that into account. And there's tons of things like insurance you pay for yourself now, and the list is massive. But
Hmm.
yeah, taking a really close look at the numbers, and obviously there's some risk involved, like having a set of clients who you can already count on before making that jump is obviously important. Without that, I mean, the numbers don't really matter because they could disappear after a shoot or two. So
Hmm.
having a steady having a steady stream of freelance clients, I think, is even more important.
Well, actually, ironically enough, that's exactly where I was going to head next with this. Like, how are you sort of building rapport? Both we can touch on sort of both the editorial side and the commercial side, because those are really useful clients, useful pool of people to work with, but you have to go
Hmm.
about it really differently. So I guess starting with editorial,
Yeah.
how are you sort of building rapport with editors and reaching out and getting work?
Yeah. So I guess I'll talk as if this was pre-coronavirus
Sure,
times.
sure. Because things will eventually go back to normal.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, in the olden days before coronavirus, yeah, I honestly wasn't doing a whole lot of outreach because I had this full-time job. So it was, I was in a good place when someone would contact me, and if I was available, I would take the job. And, it slowly started, more and more people would contact me for work, or, editors at publications obviously leave and go to another publication. And then, now that new publication starts calling me for jobs.
Hmm.
Um, I use social media pretty heavily to, tell the world what I'm working on.
Hmm.
I use it as like a marketing tool to kind of get my work out there. I think that's definitely been helpful for editorial and some other commercially types of work. Um, but yeah, after I left, I really started trying to reach out to people more. And even in the 6 months leading up to my departure from Northeastern, I was you know trying to reach out to more people, and even just hey, I'm a Boston photographer. I'd love to work together at some point if there's ever a need in the area. um, you know Many times you get no response, but
Hmm. Hmm.
it's I think every freelancer has done that sort of thing.
Yeah, and just in terms of sort of nuts and bolts for some of maybe the newer photographers out there, are these
Yeah.
just cold emails? Are you like messaging them? What's been your sort of tactic that's been the most successful as far as reaching out to editors and finding new clients that way?
Yeah, usually I've stuck to emailing. I think I usually wouldn't like Instagram message like an editor I want to work with or something like that. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. It's just not something I have done.
Hmm.
But yeah, usually emailing is what I've done, or trying to set up in-person meetings. So right after I left the university job, I emailed a bunch of people I've already worked for, and scheduled a trip to New York and set up a bunch of meetings within 3 or 4 days time. So I think that was also helpful for me.
Hmm. And just kind of pushing even farther here. So in those
Yeah.
meetings, like, what are you showing work you've done? Are you showing some personal projects, a little bit of everything? So how did those meetings go,
Yeah,
and what were some of the results of that?
totally. Yeah, I was showing a mix of work I may have shot for those publications or other publications, and a handful of personal stories I've also worked on. And there you could talk to 5 photographers and you'd get 5 different answers on how to do those things. But I was showing work, and they're quick meetings. At least mine were very quick. You talk to these people. They already know you for the most part, or they've looked at your website, so it's not like you're brand new to them. Yeah, just kind of quickly, and showing them your work while being respectful of their time, and thanking them and following up with a thank you email. Goes a long way. um, but yeah, just being nice, normal person, and respectful, I think, is as much as you can do, and obviously the portfolio. So
In those meetings, which of these personal projects have you been sharing? Which ones have gotten kind of a stronger response? Like what have you been sharing with those folks, or did you back in the day?
Yeah, I've shared a story I worked on about an arm wrestler. So that was a fun one I've liked to show because it shows sports work, but it's also, editorial kind of featurey story. Um, and then I've showed some work I shot in Cuba a couple years ago because I always thought those
Hmm.
photos were pretty. Yeah, I mean, I think another important thing is to just keep in mind who the client is that you're meeting with and tailor your portfolio to that client. So, I'm meeting with sports editors. I'm not going to show them, breaking news photos, and vice versa to, newspaper editors, who might want to see a wider variety of stuff. But, if you're meeting with a magazine rather, who, look through those pages and see like what type of work they're publishing and make sure you're not showing them like, a sports photo of some athlete they have no interest in.
So yeah, what do you think the balance is between singles and stories, both in a portfolio and in these meetings as well?
Yeah, I mean, at least from my experience, I think a lot of editors want to see both, and they definitely want to see a photo story or two. And again, it totally depends on who you're meeting with. I think maybe magazine editors might not care as much about a story as opposed to, strong lighting skills for portraiture, totally depending on what the magazine publishes or even what beat the photo editor works on. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think it really, it's really important to kind of get a good understanding of what the publication does before going into those meetings or before reaching out to someone, just because you don't want to waste their time, obviously.
Well, speaking on that, going into talking about your visual style and all of that, where did you come up with, or what's sort of the genesis of some of these techniques that you've incorporated into your work? Because say like the gelled lights, shooting through windows, these bright, vibrant colors, you don't see that a lot in more traditional photojournalism work or sports photography. So tell me a little bit about how you got started with that and your process for honing that.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I've always loved looking at the photography in Wired magazine and Fast Company, and I would start looking at the photographers who took those photos, and I really love the work of Perry Dukovic and like Brinson Banks, and there's so many amazing portrait photographers. But I would start compiling photos. I have an inspiration folder on my desktop that probably has over 1,000 portraits in it. And yeah, Northeastern, Matt and I would pull up this folder, and we'd find some really bright, colorfully lit photo and go in the studio and try to figure out how he or she did it. So a lot of just time in the studio messing around with colors and lights and things like that. Yeah, really just a lot of trial and error.
How much time were you guys spending on sort of practice, like essentially practice? Because I think a lot of people will go out and shoot and maybe they're not quite happy with how a shoot went, or their technique's not quite there, the style's not quite there. How much like actual practice time was there?
I don't know that there was a ton. I mean, so we were shooting portraits. It was probably, some days it was 2 or 3 portraits a day. So if you break it down per week, I was doing almost, anywhere from 5 to 10 portrait assignments a week. So there was a lot of just practice time built into some of those early shoots where, maybe I shot some crazy lit photo with yellow and blue and it looked terrible and, we didn't use it. So, in addition to doing all these like crazy colorful photos, I always would shoot a safe option. So, one light, simple, seamless, smiling, something, a backup essentially. So there's a lot of that, especially in the beginning of my portrait lighting journey, if you will. Because yeah, I mean, I was making lots of mistakes, and I didn't really know what I was doing. So, um, you know, having time to practice as a staffer, in a sense, was a blessing in disguise.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So for those out there that might be a little scared, a little intimidated by strobe lighting, by set lighting pieces, by
Yeah.
kind of more studio things, what was your process for learning that, for practicing it, for getting more comfortable with it?
I was one of those people who had never touched a strobe light before working at the university. So, I mean, I would Google stuff, I would watch YouTube videos, I would read, and constantly look at photography. So I think I would even email people and be like, "How did you do that?" Or, people send me messages on Instagram all the time. "How did you like that photo?" And I'll just tell them, I did this, I did that." Um, so things like that, reaching out to people. I asked other photographers. I worked with Matt Meduno, who I mentioned was amazing and a close friend. He taught me a lot about put the light here, you'll get this look. And we would just kind of mess around for a while to figure out how do we get the look that we want. And yeah, I mean, we spent a lot of time in the studio just practicing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Is there anything outside of photography that when you're kind of crafting some of these new visuals, trying to light a scene, that you're using for inspiration?
That's a good question. I mean, I like watching movies and things like that. I think a lot of older movies, after using gels for photography, you can watch a TV show or a movie and you'll be like, oh, there's a yellow gel. That's why it looks like it's sunny on her hair or whatever it is. But, paying attention to just different lighting techniques outside of photography, obviously film or any video, you can use those same principles in photography a lot of the time. So yeah, if I see something that I like, I'll like take a screenshot or pull it to my desktop and put it in this little inspiration folder. And if I'm trying to plan out a shoot and I need some new idea, I'll go to the folder and try to come up with something where I can that's new to me. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of synthesizing some of the different ideas that you've put into that big repository into something new.
Yeah.
So do you have a favorite photo story that you've worked on, or a personal project that you've done? And you talked a little bit about the arm wrestler and going to Cuba, which I'm sure Cuba could be a whole another half hour of conversation. But do you have a favorite one that really sticks with you?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it was the arm wrestling story I worked on was a lot of fun. So that, should I just go into it a
tell us
bit,
tell us a little bit about that.
That story was about this guy who was 75 at the time, and he was this competitive arm wrestler who was, he could beat people who were, in their 20s and weighed twice as much as him. So it was pretty funny. And, he was this like physical specimen. Yeah, I mean, it was fun because it was one of the first projects I worked on where, you get to meet someone, you learn something completely different from anything, you've ever known or experienced. And it really showed me, why I really like photography. It's, you're meeting new people, you're learning new things, and you're experiencing like something totally different and bizarre. I went to this arm wrestling practice in the basement of this guy's home in middle of Massachusetts. It was a nice reminder of like, oh, this is why I really love photography. It's a an excuse to learn something new and meet someone new.
So is this a purely independent project that you kind of researched and followed through on?
Yeah, so I was actually so at Northeastern you can take classes for free. So I got my master's in journalism while I was there.
Oh, okay.
And part of one of the classes, one of the professors let me do a photo story instead of a written story, which was nice. So yeah, basically I saw something about arm wrestling and I thought it would be a fun idea for a story. and did some research about, arm wrestlers in Massachusetts. There must be someone, and found this guy Norm, but he's not on email or social media or anything. So I got introduced to him through this guy I found online, basically, who's like, the arm wrestling guy in Massachusetts. And he's like, oh, I know Norm, like, come to this house, come to this practice and I'll introduce you. And then talked to Norm, and I was like, yeah, I'd love to do the story with you. And, through a little convincing and, just meeting in person, I think goes a long way, as opposed to like a cold email where he doesn't know me, I don't know him. It takes a lot for someone to be like, yeah, sure, just you want to come, to this, accompany me, be a fly on the wall and take pictures. Like, a lot of people aren't okay with that. So breaking down that barrier was not the easiest task, but worth it for the story for sure, and obviously worth it to meet Norm and learn more about his life. So that was really neat.
Fantastic. So how long did that story take from start to finish to work on?
We met up a handful of times over maybe 3 or 4 months.
Mm-hmm.
I went to a practice or two, and I went to a tournament with him and spent some time at his home with him and his wife. So yeah, a couple different meetings. We met up, and I took pictures of him in his natural habitat.
Mm-hmm. So what would you say to younger photographers that are working on sort of photo stories or trying to pursue some of these personal projects? What are those key things that they need to know?
I think one of the big things is, it's going to be uncomfortable at first. It's going to feel awkward. So just kind of knowing that going in, and, going in with an open mind that this might feel a little weird, or like, why am I here right now? Is like a normal feeling, I think. So just kind of going with it and using that energy to, put it into your photography. And, if they've invited you in, you're in. It's not like, they don't want you there. Obviously every situation is different, but for the most part, for these like one-on-one stories, gaining trust is very important to be able to tell a story in any real way. So just, knowing that it's okay to like feel a little uncomfortable at first.
Yeah, I think, and the other thing I've heard as well, kind of similar to that, is you have to know that the story might just fall apart at any time, and you have to be okay with that.
Totally.
But you also have to think it's the most important thing that you could possibly be working on.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's there. These whoever is the subject of your story is giving you their time, and like anyone, you want to be respectful of it and not waste their time and put your all into what you're doing.
Absolutely. So taking a left turn from personal projects into the commercial world, which is a gap that's bigger, I think, in people's minds for photographers, between the, say, editorial or fine art and the commercial world. How did you get started reaching clients that way and working with folks that way?
Yeah. I think some of the more commercially work I do kind of, sprouted from the editorial work. So it's people seeing the work I've done for editorial clients or for the universities. People want, or, in my experience, have maybe wanted a similar look for whatever, product or team or whatever it is they're promoting. So I guess having a distinct look or style is definitely a way to, like, potentially catch the eye of someone who might need to hire a photographer to promote their brand or whatever it is, and whatever commercial or non-editorial work you might be after.
Mm-hmm. As they say, it's better to be good, it's better to be different, but the best is to be different and better.
Can't argue with that.
Yeah, you have to be memorable when they're just going through work. If you're producing the same old stuff, the same old portraits on a white background, unless that's exactly what they're looking for, you won't be remembered.
Totally. Yep, exactly. Trying to stand out somehow, and what can you offer the client that the other photographer down the road cannot, basically.
Mm-hmm. What do you think that is for you?
Um, well, I don't think I'm better or worse than anyone else photography wise, but I think what I've been hired for in the past is strong portrait skills, strong lighting skills that might be different than other photographers. So just the colorful looks we've talked about earlier, and kind of maybe taking a subject or a scene that might otherwise be mundane, for lack of a better word, and spicing it up and making it a bit more interesting.
Nice. And with those commercial clients, like, how are you thinking about pricing? I think that's something that in our industry is sort of only spoken about in hushed tones. Like people are becoming more open about it. There's certain Facebook groups that people might be in where they talk through things, but what's your process for pricing out? Because in editorial, you don't often have a lot to say, but in those
Right.
commercial projects, how are you thinking about pricing?
Right. For me, I think about usage and distribution, I think, are the main things. And kind of taking that into account, and figuring out a fee that's appropriate for all the parties involved. But just on a base level, if I get a quote for something that I don't know what a correct fee is, I'll go to friends who are photographers and ask them, hey, like, how would you price this out, or what do you think about this? So I think it's always important to talk to other photographers whose work you like and admire, and friends, other people you trust, basically, to get their feedback and opinion on what is a appropriate pricing structure for whatever the gig might be. And a lot of times you don't really have a ton of say in what the actual end pricing looks like. At least in my experience, I haven't done any of these massive commercial gigs yet, so I'm not quite there.
So are you of the mindset, ask for what their budget is or present them your pitch first?
So I've done both, I'd say. Sometimes I'll ask for the budget, and you'll get, oh, I don't know, we don't have a number in mind. And then you're like,
they always
crap,
do, though. They always do.
Yeah. So, then I'll maybe try to do some research on the company, maybe try to see what photographers they've hired in the past, if you can figure it out. And sometimes you can't. But just try to get a better sense of the company, and their creative direction can maybe, further inform your quotes. But yeah, I mean, for me, that's definitely a tricky thing and not something I've mastered yet. So if I, if I find myself in a situation where I don't know how to price something out, I'll always reach out to friends and fellow photographers, who I know, and get their opinion, and usually meet somewhere in the middle.
Fantastic. All right, Adam, this has been an awesome interview, hearing a bit about your process, your history, all of that. So we'll just finish things off here with the lightning round.
Sounds good. Yeah, thanks for having me.
What's the one thing in your bag that you never leave home without?
My 50 millimeter lens.
Man, everybody says it.
It's cliche. I'm sorry.
It's cliche for a reason. What's the most important thing you said no to in your photographic career?
Being asked to work for free.
What keeps you up at night?
The fear that I'm accidentally going to delete photos I have yet to send off.
That is a nightmare indeed.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to a student graduating from university or college looking at a career in news or photography?
I would say don't be afraid to reach out to people who you want to talk to, who are, other photographers or editors. I think, a nice, polite email, you'll get a response from a lot of these folks, and would be happy to chat with you for a couple minutes.
Yeah, we are not nearly as scary as we seem.
No.
And finally, speaking of that, where can people see some more of your work or connect with you online?
Yeah, so I'm at adamglanzmanphotography.com, and my Instagram and Twitter handles are at glanzpiece.
All right, Adam, thanks so much for coming on the Photo Forward podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's been fun.
Thanks, everyone, for listening to today's amazing episode with Adam Glanzman. That's at glanzpiece on Instagram. Definitely go check him out online and give him a follow. You will not be disappointed. As we mentioned in the intro to today's episode, if you've got a question or anything you want to ask on the show that I'll respond to AMA style, I've set up a page at photoforward.media/connect, or feel free to send an email or voice message to connect@photoforward.media, and we'll tackle those Q&As in some upcoming episodes. Enjoying listening to the Photo Forward podcast? Want to hear more thought-provoking, engaging discussions about photography, creativity, or freelance business? Well, this is where you come in. We want to get the word out as wide as possible about Photo Forward and reach as many listeners as possible. And the best way to do that is through reviews and recommendations on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you consume your podcasts. If you want to support more engaging and intimate conversations with photographers, cinematographers, and storytellers the world over, head on over to the Photo Forward page and drop a review to let me know how you all are enjoying the show, or even just a rating. It means a ton to growing the show, and I personally read through each and every review to make this show the best damn visual storytelling podcast out there. Thanks for listening, everyone, and as always, keep seeing, keep thinking, and keep putting your best photo forward. Catch you all in the next one.